I especially wanted to get to this one because I was so intrigued by the questions. Mary Kessinger, one of our Focus Plus subscribers, sent in this question. She says, in an Eden perfect world, of what benefit would it be for anyone to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Without law there is no sin. Would not eating of the tree exponentially increase the probability of sin? Like God saying, okay, you've done a good job avoiding one sin. Now that you are more mature, let's really see what you're made of. So there's a second part. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to cover this at first. So the question is about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Of course, in Genesis chapter 2, that command is given in verse 16. You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. I believe she's referencing the theory that eventually Adam and Eve were going to be given access to that tree, that it wasn't there just as a constant, no touch, let's see how strong your willpower is, but that God was going to bring them to the point where they were allowed to eat of that tree and have the knowledge of good and evil. This is really based in, number one, Adam's mandate to rule over the world and have dominion, and he was going to need that wisdom and knowledge of good and evil to do so. But number two, from the end of Hebrews 5 and into Hebrews chapter 6, it talks about maturity is discerning the will of God, knowing what is right and wrong. When you grow from milk to meat, as Christians, that's our job to get there. And we see this with Jesus early in his ministry. He denies the temptations, denies himself, doesn't take that instant gratification that Satan offers him, and of course comes to live the perfect life. And the kingdoms, everything is given to him. He's given all authority in heaven and on earth. And that he's bringing us through that same process, that he's teaching us to deny sin in ourselves here, that eventually we will be like him, we'll reign with him forever and ever, and be freed from sin forevermore. And in that state of freedom from sin forever, when we're like him, as 1 John 3 says, we're not going to have that that temptation of sin, even though we have the perfect knowledge, even though we have the knowledge that they would have received from the tree, we're not going to go out about sinning. So what Mary is referencing is kind of this idea that there was one sin, eating of the tree, and then once you eat of that, you have the knowledge that all kinds of other things are off limits and opens you up to other sins. But the idea was one of delayed gratification. Kind of, if you've ever heard about the marshmallow test they did with 5-year-old children, and predicting their success based on if they could delay the gratification, leave a marshmallow in front of them and leave the room, and the ones that could wait on the marshmallow and were promised something better, that they, because they didn't have instant gratification impulses, they that had all kinds of other benefits in their life, that they were able to deny and delay all kinds of other things for better things. And so if Adam and Eve had gone to the point where God had brought them to maturity and let them eat of that tree, they would have already seen, I don't want this, I want that, and now that I know more, when I pass that first test, each test after that is so much easier. That's kind of the theory behind all this. This is all in theory as to how it would have worked, but I do believe, number one, they would have been given access to that tree eventually, as Adam would have needed it to rule the world, and number two, that when they did, they would have denied the sin of doing so long that sin becomes clear to them. And that's kind of the idea of why we're not going to sin in heaven, is because it'll have been so clear to us of the ugliness of sin on the other side of it, that we'll have already made our choice of what we want, and God will say, I'm giving you what you want in full. And so that's the first part of the question. The second is, are Enoch's and Elijah's ends, that's of course Enoch being taken up with God, because he walked with God and he was no more, and then Elijah in the chariot, that best we know, they are the two men in the Bible who never died. Are Enoch's and Elijah's ends to be taken as how Adam's time on earth, or that of any other person who did not eat, would end? This is pure speculation, but I believe so. We see in Revelation the city of God, and man being joined together, that we all live with God, we are around his throne, we are there with him forever. Well, God would come to the Garden of Eden, but Adam and Eve didn't live with God. They weren't in the city of God. There was still that separation. And so the idea was that as Enoch was taken up to God, eventually Adam would have been taken up to God. Eve could have been taken up to God and never have had to die, because death was not brought on by sin. One of the hints at this, that I do with this what you will, but I thought it was very interesting when I heard one commentator point it out, was that Enoch lived to 365 years. Of course, we understand the significance of the number 365, of the days in a year, that there's a completeness there. He went around the sun, and that's a full year. Well, that Enoch made it to 365, and that's when God said, that's enough, we'll take you out of there. You don't have to die, you don't have to suffer, go through any of that decline. You've kind of to use Paul's words, run the race. You've done what you were there to do. And so, whether that means that or not, it's just a very interesting number that he came to. And so, do with that what you will. As I said, that is speculative, but I personally believe that was the designed end for God and his people at that time. Again, a lot of this is theory and speculation. We're picking up on breadcrumbs throughout Scripture, but a very fascinating question, a very interesting thought experiment. And so, again, thank you to Mary for the question. If there are any follow-ups, be sure to let me know in the comments. If you have another question you would like to have addressed on Scriptural Focus, again, we're getting to these as we can, where we can, in makeshift studios, but be sure and send them in, and we will get them up as soon as we can. Thanks.